In the mid of autumn, a family was floated with happiness all around them, celebrating pompously with the hope of getting a son from the pregnant women of the household. And when the baby was delivered, it was a daughter. No one wanted to see her face. She could see it but couldn't speak, so stood in silence. Slowly and steadily, she grew up from being a kid and was noticed by a man whom she knew by the name of Uncle. She ran to him because the man was trustworthy. Apparently, that's what her mother told her. She hugged her uncle happily but felt something creeping in her thighs and sometime between her legs. She cried in pain and narrated her suffering to her mother, but she was told to be silent. She stood in silence. Years flew like dust. She is 12 now, started to bleed. She screamed, seeing blood stream on her clothes, her dress drenched in red, blood shedding drop by drop. She asked herself, "Why is my body bleeding? Am I going to die?" None told her the reason. She questioned her mother why, and that day her mother held her breath and said, "Keep quiet, girl, it's your destiny." She stood in silence again. As the sky turns from blue into pink, the girl fell in love. She was 18 and he was 22. He seemed to prove all her negative assumptions to be wrong, making her heart pound. And one day he asked her to meet him. She was dressed red that night, and he walked to her with a bottle of wine. And that night she gave away her virginity, and very next day she found herself alone in a hotel room. And looking all over, she realized he has left. She cried over and over but couldn't fix anything. She again narrated her suffering to her mother, but once again her mother told her to be silent and not to say a word about this to anyone. As the time went on, the grown-up girl married another man. She was told that her husband's home was her new home. Happily she believed. One fine day, her husband told, "You don't belong here." And that line felt she was stranded. Once again, unable to think anything, with her mind asking to herself these questions: who am I? Where from I belong? The home I was dreaming to be mine, was it a dream? Was I devoid from reality? Life changes from the phase of taking her poverty to her virginity, but all she did is stood in silence. "It's your destiny," they said, and she stood in silence. Years rolled and she realized she had to stand on her own, not laying on the ground. She chose to get back up, and when you look at her now, you can see the glistening eyes, brighter and broader smile, more beautiful than the moonlight. And listening to her story, now the world stood in silence, for she created her own destiny, and that's her story.